que viera esto se muere de nuevo.
Ay, dale mis gracias.
Normal.
Para ganar hay que mirar al rival. Por eso a mí me gusta jugar con mala gente. Es gente como uno.
It's not about white. It's not about black. It's about the police keep killing us.
I feel embarrassed sometimes of my job. I'm supporting Black Lives Matter, but it's like I support my mom.
A mí me pueden decir lo que me quieran decir, pero yo nunca me detengo, ¿sabes? Eso es algo muy bien característico de los cubanos. Nosotros no paramos.
Mi mamá me decía que llegaría la revolución. Desde entonces yo la esperaba con miedo y el pueblo con esperanza.
The two cops that killed Mahavez Goodblanket received medals of valor. More than 125 years after the massacre of 300 of my people, they are still giving medals for killing Indians.
You're powerful enough for the journey. You must be powerful enough to return.
Hello, everyone. My name's Andrea Weiss, and I'm here with the director, Deirdre Fishel. How this works, quickly, I just want to tell you, is I'm going to start off with a few questions for Deirdre, and then the audience can type their questions into the chat box. And if I like your questions and we have enough time, I'll ask her some of them later on. But before we start, I want to thank Diana Vargas for this really great film festival, the Americas Film Festival, and everybody else involved with it. Every film I've ever seen in this festival has been wonderful, especially this year's opening night film. And I also want to thank the festival for profiling our MFA students' work in a program of short films that will be Friday afternoon. So Deirdre Fishel is a producer-director of documentaries and dramatic films that have been premiered in competition at South by Southwest, Sundance, AFI, Full Frame, and other festivals, and have been broadcast in 35 countries worldwide. And prior to this film, Women in Blue, which you've just seen, she directed the documentary Care, which looks at the poignant but hidden world of home elder care. And that was funded by PBS, the TBS fund of PBS, the Ford and MacArthur Foundations, and it was broadcast on PBS's America Reframed. And then, of course, she's made many other films over the years. I'm not going to take up all of our time naming them, but you can look her up. She's also associate professor and director of the BFA in film and video at the City College of New York, where she is my colleague. So, Deirdre, about Women in Blue, I first want to congratulate you on the film, the success it's had, and really, this is so great that we have this opportunity today to talk about it, because, you know, we're always kind of
rushing in the halls,
figuring out the room
these days.
So it's really nice to be able to have a substantive conversation with you. I really appreciate this opportunity. And also, I want to start by saying I heard some Q&As with you about the film. And to be honest, they focus mostly on the subject matter, which is important, the situation of women in the police force. But I thought because of that, it might be interesting for you and for the audience to focus tonight more on filmmaking and specifically on, you know, your role as the director of the film. Okay?
Great. Love that.
So to get it to start with my first question, I want to get into discussing some of the directorial decisions you've made and just have you walk us through them. Like the film essentially follows five women, right? So how did you choose those 5 characters, and why did you choose 5 as opposed to say 1 or 3? And how did you choose which ones to include?
Sure. Thank you to the festival for being here, and what a pleasure to be with you, Andrea. You know, I think I wanted to show women in different roles because I was interested in exploring this notion of what women could bring to policing. And I had found statistics going back to the 90s that women do approach policing differently. And so I was interested in exploring it. So it felt, I didn't want it just to be from the top, which would have been Chief Harto. And I wanted there to be someone who was on the streets, because that's a very particular thing. I wanted women in different levels of leadership. I wanted diversity. So I don't think I thought at first that it would be as many as 5, and that had a lot of editorial challenges. But I think as I got to know them and thought about the complexity of policing, I wanted to explore a lot of different angles, and that's why I chose those 5 women. And I was very, very lucky because, police and police departments are traditionally, they're very skeptical. They don't like to be looked at and reviewed. And to get the kind of access that I got, it's happened before for film crews, but it's very unusual. And it had to do with the fact that Chief Harto was interested in having a film made about women. And so she did something that was really incredible. She got all the women in the department into a room, and they had never been in a room together. And in fact, there's so few women in the department that they were often in meetings or in squad cars where they were the only woman. So that was like this amazing thing to see all these women and how much they gained from being together. And I was able to talk about the film and that it was going to be a verite film and I would want to follow people for some time. And 4 of the women were in that room. So that became, she made it very easy for me to help find the women that I would follow. And the first person I met and was absolutely clear that she would be the heart of the film was Sergeant White. And she was there in the front row.
So just to pick up something you said was you didn't initially think you would have 5 characters. So when you started, did you start actually filming with 5 characters, or did you pick up more as the story continued?
Well, I started filming. I did start filming with 5, but I didn't think that they would all make it into the film.
Right.
And it became, and especially because some, I wasn't sure that both Inspector Johnson and Chief Chido would both get in because they were both in leadership positions. But then when Inspector Johnson left pretty quickly, it felt like it was important to follow her story and how she felt about feeling sort of sidelined, that the department was moving backwards enough to make her feel that she wanted to leave the department. And then Commander Chido's story felt important because she was sort of left behind trying to navigate having lost 2 of women in leadership. But I did always know that I wanted to have someone who was a patrol officer. It's a very different thing to be on the street. And it's a place where you're in the direct line of a fire with the community, and it's a very important role in terms of that's what we really, I think, need to do it a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk some more about let's talk about some of the aesthetic choices. So it's interesting. You said it was going to be verite style, but actually it's a kind of a hybrid, I would say, in many ways. It's certainly not pure, what we call.
No, it's definitely not pure. Yeah.
But sort of to pick up on that, you decided to introduce each character by having us hear them speaking in voiceover while we watch them going about their jobs, like driving, or one of them's exercising, whatever they're doing. But they're not speaking to camera, and we see them speaking to camera like in sync. In sync sound. In a group situation, like in a meeting, but you don't really utilize interviews until Chief Harto resigns. I don't know, maybe that's a third of the way into the film, or almost a third. And then you start having a series of on-camera interviews, like the woman, I can't remember her name, from the domestic violence unit that got moved to internal affairs.
Mm-hmm. Her name is Commander Chido.
Chido. Okay. So she's, that's, I think, like maybe the first, and then it follows soon after the chief Arredondo, who kind of justifies why he didn't, why he elevated men over women. And then there's the head of the police union. So that suddenly we're having a few, not many, but a few 2-camera interviews. And so what I'm asking is, there's a slight change stylistically in the film when the interviews are introduced. And I'm curious about that decision. Like, why did you not use them to begin with? Or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that overall, I'm not a lover of the sit-down interview. I think for me, it sort of takes me a little bit out of the story, and I'd much rather be hearing something and also be getting a sort of visual sense of someone's story. I feel like you can get so much from seeing someone in their surroundings and in their world, and also in general, I tend to work in that style where I don't do a pure verite, in the sense that I think that I like to get inside people's head and to have them take a scene and take us a little deeper into what's going on. I think when there were some key events, like for instance, I went in April of 2017, and Justine Damon was shot by Officer Noor in July. So it was like a very cataclysmic event. I did not know if I would maintain access. I didn't know if I was going to be able to stay. And everyone was sort of in turmoil. It was a very crazy moment. And I think the women were very upset, and the whole department didn't know what was going to happen. They weren't at all sure that Chief Rondo would come in. And so I think at that point, some of those interviews felt like that people had a lot of feeling about it. So for Chief Chido in that moment, just being in her kitchen with her and just, being in those real moments of that interview. I'm not sure that I'm being that articulate. Also, I wasn't following Chief Rondo. I mean, he let me stay.
Yeah.
So, but I felt I had to kind of, because the women were so upset about what was happening, it didn't feel right. And also I knew that there were a lot of great things about him. I mean, it was incredible to have a Black chief for the first time in 150 years of that city, especially a city that has such horrible racial disparities. So I wanted to hear from him. But yeah, I guess I don't tend to love the interview look, but then I rarely, I was thinking about that because I just saw a closing night film of the Tribeca Film Festivals, and there's no interviews. It's all voiceover too. And I really sort of had the thought, did they just do it like with a recorder? Did they not actually film it? And I saw another film, there's a new film about Dave Chappelle, and also a lot of it, I don't know that there's any sit down interview. And I thought, wow, that would be the brave thing if a filmmaker started to, make the choice, like, I'm actually not going to use the
That's have you seen MLK FBI? Because Sam Pollard's film has all these voices of different people, and their name comes on, but you never see them throughout the entire film. It's a very interesting film, by the way.
Yeah, it is. Actually, now that you say that, I remember that, but I was trying to remember the part about,
So can I just jump on something you said, which I was going to get to later, but I want to bring it up since you brought it up.
Okay.
So you made this film over 4 years? Something like that?
I was actually I started filming in April of 2017, and the film was done in May of 2020. It was finished before Floyd was murdered. Yeah. And then the film was opened up, and then we finished it again in October of 2020. So about 3.5 years.
A year and a half, 3.5, more than 3 years. So, and so many really unpredictable things happened in Minneapolis during that time. So I just thought, can you talk a little more about the experience of directing a nonfiction film where you're following characters and things are changing, well, literally sometimes minute to minute. So what was that like in terms of having to constantly rewrite the film's narrative, rethink where the film was going, and how do you know, sort of when to stop filming?
that I had never made a film like this where events were unfolding that quickly. And I don't think, I had wanted to go, I wanted to go to Minneapolis because it had a woman chief who was promoting women and was starting a recruitment campaign, and it made sense to explore it as a place to look at what women could bring. But I also went to Minneapolis because it did have a history of police misconduct, and because Jamar Clark had been killed there, and there was a lot of kind of pain in the community because those officers never received any charges. And the reason is that I never wanted to make a film about women in policing that was siloed aside from the greater issues that were happening in policing. Because if women, the only reason that we should be thinking about getting more women is if we can improve what has been obviously a very, very problematic institution, to say the least. But that it would go from one officer involved shooting to multiple, and that it would be, there would be a constant changing of the guards, and that it would be like a rubber band snapped. The second Chief Harteau left, it was like a rubber band snapped, and I never felt the same way again. I felt like when she was there, it was like, come in, go anywhere you want. And after that, I actually felt very nervous all the time that they were going to take away our access. And I think I went in maybe naively thinking that although I wanted to make a film about gender because of the issue of police brutality that was primarily happening against people of color, I did think about it as I'm making a film about gender and policing. Once Officer Noor, that event happened where Justine Damon was killed, and it was so clear that everything was perceived differently because that was a white woman who had been shot by a black officer, and suddenly it was like, she got fired, and there was an international uproar. I just suddenly realized, like, I'm not making a film about gender and policing. I'm making a film about gender, race, and violence, and you actually can't pull them apart. So, and I felt like there were so many different strands, because there was the Noor case and the way that was unfolding, and there was no winning there because people wanted him to be charged, but if he was charged, it also showed how problematic it was that so many Black men who had been killed those officers weren't charged. So it was sort of, when there's that much pain in a history, it's sort of, so there's that Noor case. And then there was this case of these women who were feeling completely disenfranchised and losing a lot of power and jumping ship. And then there was this, what I consider the kind of promising story, and the story that inspired me to keep going, which was the story of Officer White becoming a sergeant, and I think brilliantly being put into the 4th Precinct. And to me, showing this image of what was possible, and keeping all those strands together was a nightmare. I'll just be honest. Every time we thought I had budgeted the editing time, and we had initially said 32 weeks. I think that we were at 42, and that was before we reopened the film. So it was also very, we were going way over budget in terms of the editing, but the pieces to get them all together was very, very complicated. And I think also by the time I was done with the film, I feel very differently than when I went in. I think it's clear to me that incremental reform doesn't work. I don't think you can just put women in or people of color in. I think you have to change the system. That said, I think one thing we can look at is a completely different kind of approach and a different kind of person in there. And I think women can be part of that. Obviously not all women, because we can see that this recent Kim Potter situation, yes. So I don't know if that answered it, but it was a very, for pretty much this, from July 2017 until I delivered that film in October 2020, I felt like I was always in a state of panic.
Yeah, but I think this one of the big strengths of the film is that you managed to not just make it about gender and policing, but you actually, had the bigger picture and how that fits in. And that was, I mean, because and there's so many little things tucked in there that you obviously didn't have time to really tease out that much. But, the idea that Chief Berteau had to resign, even though she was right there on the microphone saying she did not, she did not condone what happened. And she had to resign. And yet the next chief, the whole George Floyd, he didn't lose his job. In fact, the community wasn't even saying anything. They were saying the union guy or someone else, saying some other target who needed to resign. It was like such a clear double standard in terms of the price that women paid, for those things that went wrong. But you couldn't obviously, it's just there, and different people are going to latch onto that or latch onto something else because there's just so many things you can, dig into. But it's interesting that you said about how you feel differently now, because I was thinking your film seems to present a hypothesis. It doesn't really hammer you over the head with it or anything, but it is kind of there, seems to be there, that this hypothesis that women police differently than men do and use less excessive force. And right, am I right that that's in the film to some extent? Did the process of making over the course of making the film, do you feel like that hypothesis was proven, bears out, or do you think it's an open question?
I think it's complicated because I also think there is, I think the character of Officer Grabowski, I also think that she was affected. So, at the beginning when she says, oh, we found our groove, he was too aggressive, her partner. And then, I kind of assumed, well, the groove is that he became less aggressive, but part of the groove was that she became more aggressive. So I think I saw that in a very hyper-masculine culture, certain women are going to actually bend the other way. I do still think so. I still do believe that as a whole, women bring a different, because so much of policing and so much of what's negative about policing is about sort of this ego and this idea that I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it. And if you don't comply, then, you know what I mean, then I'm going to get more aggressive. And that's kind of that's what the union president says. So you've got all this reform going on the one hand in that department and departments all over the country. And then you have the union guy, Bob Kroll, who is, he thinks that's all garbage, right? He doesn't believe that you should de-escalate. He thinks it's ask them, make them, tell them. So while I do believe that women and a whole new approach, which is about care and about treating people as human beings and also about like what, if the goal is public safety, then the question is putting this person in jail going to serve that? Or is that just going to like destroy this person and their extended family? So, but I think I became more aware that the systemic changes are really huge. And I think there's structural racism and there's structural sexism. And I do believe now that it's not going to be a single woman chief or a few women coming in that's going to make a difference. I think we're going to need changes from the outside that are going to change who is the kind of person that gets put into policing. And I don't know that it's going to happen without it either coming from consent decrees from the federal government or tying it to police budgets. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of outreach, is to see if we can get mayors to really see the benefits to having more women, having a whole new approach to what we're looking for. Like, why are we looking for upper body strength and speed when, in fact, what police officers really need are cultural competency, empathy, de-escalation skills. Why are we letting 23-year-old boys go into and carry a gun? It's, so, but that's not gonna, I don't believe after making the film that that's gonna happen unless it's forced, because the status quo is the status quo. And there's a lot of people who don't actually want to see it change, despite the outcry that's happening in this country.
Yeah. True. Okay, so I want to ask you one more question, and then I see there's one question, and if other people have questions they want to ask, please put them in the chat. But before we get to that one, I wanted to go back a little bit more to the whole question of making the kinds of directorial decisions you were faced with. And one thing I noticed is about, I don't know, 15 or so minutes into the film, you did a drive along with that young rookie cop. And so I thought something very interesting happens there. In the middle of the scene, we're watching the scene, and then her voice comes in as a voiceover. She starts talking about how she feels about working with her partner, who she feels maybe uses too much force. And then, but we never see what actually happens. What they're doing is they're pulling someone over who doesn't have a driver's license.
Right.
But we never, the next time we see her, it's another day, and she's going into an apartment. So is it fair to say that you made a decision at some point to take a more character-driven approach rather than a narrative-driven one, or like having forced to make these kinds of hard choices, you went more with character than with plot, because the characters build, but the scenes they're in don't necessarily resolve. Like there was, nothing played out there. So I thought that was interesting. Is that something that came about in the editing room, or did you initially think of it as character driven in the sense that we're following these women's trajectories and what they're actually doing in the scene, if it's just daily policing, doesn't really matter that much, or right, what was the thinking?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that was a hard thing. I mean, I think that whether it was going to be character driven or plot driven, and I think ultimately what happened was that the main character, the big character in the room, was what was unfolding in Minneapolis. And that was so much bigger than any of the specific stories. So that became that was the driving plot force. And then we were trying to kind of have you get to know these women around that. But yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, we edited this so many times. I mean, if I actually go on to do a case study with my students in the fall, I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of cuts. And so, when it gets that complicated, I feel like at a certain point, there is a way in which it's such a complicated puzzle that I couldn't even think like that. Like, is this a character? Is this a plot? It's just sort of, how much can we get you on board this world that was unfolding really rapidly? And all of these people are sort of part of it, if that makes any sense. But I think you're giving us credit for having more control, because it was just moving.
Well, it was just that particular scene happened.
See, for me, he was kind of aggressive in that scene, because I felt like, if you look at the way he did that traffic stop, as opposed to the way Sergeant White her traffic stop,
totally.
It's needlessly snotty. It's needlessly kind of aggressive. And that's actually something that I personally have a big problem with, which is, I don't, there's an ethos in the police department that, kind of being harsh or cursing a lot. Actually, there's a lot of cursing that is sort of part of the tactics. And I just don't, especially on a traffic stop like that. Like, I'm sure that young man that was stopped had a bad taste in his mouth after he was stopped by her partner, Tinsley. Whereas I feel like the young man that was stopped by Sergeant White would have had a very different feeling about that interaction.
That was an amazing scene. Oh, wow. That was a very intense scene.
So
okay, I have to, before time runs out, ask you a couple of questions that have been put in the chat. So we got to keep moving along.
All right.
I get you. Okay, so what has the reception to your film been from police departments and community leaders from around the United States? Has it factored into conversations about reimagining public safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that is really the goal of it's, although the film has gotten a lot of press and it's been out there a lot, sort of really pushing it into these conversations around reimagining public safety can be actually very, very difficult because things are so intense right now, particularly in Minneapolis. And I think that's really, there's sort of two camps. There's a kind of camp that's sort of more of this law and order and look at what's happening. And then there's a camp that's sort of like, why are we talking about women? We need sort of more major changes. And I think we've been really trying to massage this idea that that we do need structural changes and we do need massive changes to the power of police unions and to thinking like training. If you're going to have training, you have to have some way to account for training. But I've kind of lost my thought right now. Is it factoring? I think that's the goal. We're going to be at the Congressional Black Caucus in the fall, and that is what we're hoping. In terms of police departments, I think this police department was a lot happier with the film before it was the film post George Floyd. And I think that the thing that I think hurts me the most is that police department has been very unsupportive of Sergeant White. And
she was amazing. I mean, she's like a model. It's like if you could conjure up a model for like how to improve policing, you would conjure her up like out of thin air. It's like an ideal. It's crazy.
And how masculine an institution it is that in that world, not one person in her department congratulated her. And I think it's partly jealousy. It's partly not wanting her to have the spotlight. But I think that says a lot about how open to change people really are.
Mm. So the other question, so this ties right into the next question, which is why do you think Chief Arredondo managed to benefit from the leadership of a woman, but did not promote any female officers when he took over? Was he a hypocrite?
That's a very complex question. I mean, he certainly was promoted 4 or 5 times by Chief Harteau. So clearly he was in the position that he was in to take over that role because of her. But more than that, he was involved in a lot of conversations about why it was important to have the perspective of women in leadership. And so it was a blow. I mean, whether he was a hypocrite, it was a blow. And I think this has to do with any kind of ism. It's like, there's is he walking around as like a flagrant sexist? No, but it wasn't a priority for him. And I don't think there's any getting away from that. And I think that the police department suffered tremendously, not to mention the fact that they lost one of the most progressive cops I've ever met, which is Inspector Johnson, someone who was really trying to change things. And they, and set off a chain reaction of people leaving. The union was very happy with him when he had no women in the front office. So that's also kind of problematic. So, but it just, all I can say is it wasn't a priority.
Yeah, that's clear. And still the film doesn't demonize him. I mean, the film, as should be, recognizes how historic it was that he was in that position. But even when I can't remember her name brings up, that we need to have this conversation, he's like, okay, I want to, put you on the spot and you can take care of it. No funding, no recognition, no title, nothing. Just you go deal with this, and then I can.
Right, and isn't that how women are treated in all over in so many industries?
Yeah. Yeah, completely familiar. You have a question from Diana Vargas, the festival director, curator. How to stay away from a complacent and somewhat compassionate vision of the women interviewed. Were there times when you were tempted to take sides?
I mean, I think in my, in my own way, I was always had my own personal thoughts, but I think that I did go in with a notion that I wasn't going to make a film that was there to just attack the police department, that I really was interested in exploring from a more kind of journalistic point of view. I did actually become very disconcerted with Officer Grabowski when it became clear that I felt she was moving more the other way. And I felt that she was becoming more aggressive the more that we followed her. And I hope that the film showed that was problematic, that women are not above becoming part of what's wrong, part of the problem. So I don't know if that really answers the question. But I think we did work very hard to make the film as balanced as possible. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, she was still sympathetic. I mean, she was very sympathetic. And you almost kind of understood. I mean, in that interview, in that conversation she has with her father,
yeah,
you kind of understood why she became like that. It's very tricky because that is the culture that she's in, So you're saying you need to change the culture. You can't change individual behavior without changing the whole.
100%. And that's the systemic part of it, and I think that's the part that says it's not about just putting in a few people, because once you get women in, that's the other thing, you have to protect them. I mean, you have to make it so that you can't put someone of a lower rank up and over, right? That should be a human resource violation. That if you're going to have a committee that's about recruitment of women, how can it be that you don't have any women? There was nowhere for those women to go. And I really felt how isolated and disenfranchised. And it was a unique moment in that police department when the women felt empowered. And I watched it. It slipped away. And there's not going to be a Chief Arto in every department. So if we really want to create real change and bring in a new group of people, then, you're going to have to figure out, how do you get them? And then once they're there, how do you protect them so that they can become change agents? It's not a small thing. It's pretty daunting, and you need numbers, because it's not going to be a couple. You're going to need a lot.
Critical mass to make a change. But I would say, Deirdre, it does have a kind of a journalistic slant in terms of it being investigative. Like, you're going in with a kind of a premise, but you're testing it, and but it's not journalistic in that there is no real attempt to be, unbiased, right? I mean, if you had no opinion on this subject, you wouldn't be interested in making this film. I mean, so
100%. Yeah.
So, I mean, even though, none of these women are, I mean, except for Sergeant White, none of these women are perfect. You could feel through them the sympathy that you have toward them, toward their position, the risks they're taking, the way they're undermined, the way they are, people are promoted over them, they're reassigned without, they're given extra work without compensation, they're reassigned without understanding what their job is. There are so many different kind of little, they're not little, but they're
microaggressions, one after the other.
Yeah. They add up. they might be little, but they add up to a kind of to the culture. So I think that comes across, and it wouldn't come across so well, I think, if you had tried to be more, let's call it objective, Anyway, we're supposed to wrap things up. Is there one more question maybe we could take, or no? Okay. So is there anything I didn't, someone says, congratulations, it was an interesting documentary, but there's no question attached. Is there anything you wanted to say, Deirdre,
I would love for, if people want to go on our website, join our mailing list. We're going to be doing hopefully a rollout of outreach screenings, and I'd love just to keep people abreast of what we're doing and keep you guys in the conversation. So thank you, Andrea. And
thank you.
And thank you to Diana.
Yeah, thanks everyone. This was, and also everybody, be sure to continue tuning in to the America's Film Festival, because there's a lot of good stuff still ahead. Okay, thank you. I think we're going to be disconnected.